He didn't go to her apartment for love. He went because she held the ledger, and Kang Tae-min never left loose ends breathing. 2 days before a wedding that would fuse 2 syndicates into one empire, his relentlessly reliable assistant vanished without a word. When he finally kicked through the swollen wood of her front door, braced for betrayal, the metallic scent of copper stopped him cold. What waited for him in that freezing, blood-streaked room didn't just crack his carefully ordered world in half. It made him cancel the wedding outright. The tailor's chalk scraped against the wool of Tae-min's trousers, a dry, grating sound that crawled straight under his skin. He stood motionless on the velvet-topped platform, eyes fixed on the gilded mirror across the fitting room. The reflection belonged to a man who had spent a decade sanding the blood off his own hands until they looked clean. The charcoal suit was cut tight through the ribs to hide the leather holster he refused to remove, even for a fitting. "Don't puff your chest like that, Tae-min," GR murmured from the leather sofa behind him, thumbs already moving across her phone, firing instructions at people whose names she'd never bother learning. "Han Nim needs the shoulder seam to sit perfectly. You keep shifting." Tae-min didn't answer. A dull headache was blooming behind his eyes. The air in the boutique on the 7th floor of the Cheongdam Tower was thick with orchid oil and old money. Suffocating. "The peonies," GR said, finally glancing up. Her hair was pulled into a severe knot, and she was beautiful the way a freshly owned blade is beautiful. Cold, precise, made for cutting. "My mother thinks they look cheap. I told her we're merging the Kang shipping lines with the O family's ports, not throwing a garden party. White, silver, black. That's the palette." "Whatever you want," Tae-min said flatly. It was a transaction, a contract sealed in raw silk and 300 guests. He didn't love her. She didn't love her. That was precisely why it was supposed to work. But as Mr. Han pinned the cuff, driving a silver needle through the fabric with a practiced flick, Tae-min's attention drifted to the empty space beside the changing screen. Yoon Soo-yeon wasn't there. Soo-yeon had been his assistant for 4 years, the buffer between his violent, unruly world and the polished front he presented to banks and prosecutors alike. She knew he took his coffee black and scalding. She knew exactly how many envelopes to hand the harbor police so they'd keep their eyes on the water instead of the trucks. She was a ghost inside the machine, unremarkable height, sensible flats, and an unnerving lack of fear. When O family enforcers had crowded his office last month, posturing and flexing, Soo-yeon had simply walked between them with a stack of files and asked one twice her size to move his foot so she could vacuum. She had missed 2 check-ins. 48 hours of silence. 4 years ago she'd walked into his office as a temp sent by an agency that had no idea what kind of company it was staffing, and within a week she'd rewritten his entire filing system so that not even his own lawyers could find what they weren't supposed to. He'd offered her triple the salary to stay quiet about what she'd seen. She'd asked for double, plus health insurance for her mother. He'd never forgotten that. The fact that she'd negotiated down from what he offered, because she only ever asked for exactly what she needed. Tae-min stepped off the platform. "Sajang Nim, the jacket," Mr. Han protested, hands fluttering. "We're done." Tae-min shrugged off the half-finished coat and tossed it over a velvet chair. GR lowered her phone, her sharp eyebrows drawing together. "Tae-min, the wedding is in 2 days. The photographer needs the final fitting shots." "I have a leak," Tae-min said, pulling his dress shirt off the rack and buttoning it with quick, impatient fingers. Soo-yeon hasn't checked in for 2 days. GR exhaled, elegant and bored, crossing her legs. "Your secretary. Fire her when she resurfaces. She's probably nursing a hangover or angling for a raise. Let HR deal with it." Tae-min stopped mid-button and looked at her. Really looked. Flawless skin. Manicured nails. A life entirely insulated from the blood that had paid for the ring on her finger. "She's not a secretary," he said, his voice dropping into the low register that made grown men reconsider their bladders. "She holds the encryption keys to every offshore account I have. She keeps the physical ledger for the dock payoffs. If she's gone, she either sold me out or someone put her in the ground." "And you think chasing down a wayward employee is a priority this week?" "My father lands from Busan tonight. We have the rehearsal dinner. I don't send people to handle my liabilities," Tae-min said, strapping the shoulder holster across his chest, the familiar weight of the pistol settling against his ribs. "I handle them myself." He walked out before she could answer, the little brass bell above the door chiming a cheerful, mocking farewell. The sky over Seoul had gone the color of a fresh bruise, and the first fat drops of rain were starting to fall by the time Taemin reached the black SUV idling at the curb. His driver, Do-yoon, flicked a cigarette into the gutter and scrambled behind the wheel. "Where to, boss?" Wonjongdong, the building at the dead end of the alley behind the old textile mill. Do-yoon's hands tightened on the wheel. "Boss, that's practically old territory. We're not supposed to have anyone on the ground over there until the marriage certificate's signed." Taemin leaned back and closed his eyes as the rain began to smear the glass. He paid Seo-yeon enough to afford a high-rise in Yeoksam with a doorman and secure parking. When he'd demanded her address from his head of security an hour ago, he'd stared at the text in disbelief. Wonjongdong was a dying vein of the city. Condemned buildings, gutted streetlights, the kind of place where police only showed up to collect bodies. Why was she living there? He ran the numbers in his head out of habit, the way he ran every number that mattered to him. Her salary, her mother's care, the rent on a decent one-room in Yeoksam. The math didn't work unless she was bleeding money somewhere he couldn't see, and Taemin did not like things he couldn't see. It was the reason he'd built an empire instead of inheriting a quiet one. It was also, he realized somewhere around the fourth red light, the exact reason he'd never once asked Seo-yeon how she was actually living. He'd assumed. Assumption was a luxury he only ever extended to the people closest to him, and it was the most dangerous luxury there was. He thought of the last time he'd seen her. Tuesday evening, feeding documents into the shredder, her skin sallow, a bruise blooming along her jaw beneath badly matched concealer. She'd blamed a cabinet door. He'd accepted the lie because it was convenient, because he had a wedding to plan. Self-disgust settled low in his stomach, heavy as wet sand. If she'd taken the ledger to the O family to sabotage the merger, he would have to kill her. He didn't want to. He wanted to shake her until she explained herself. The glass towers gave way to crumbling brick as they drove. The rain fell harder. "Pull over here," Taemin ordered as they reached a row of four-story buildings leaning against each other like drunks holding each other up. "I should come with you," Do-yoon offered. "Stay with the car. Keep it running." There was no buzzer, no working door, just a sheet of warped plywood nailed over broken glass. Taemin pushed inside. The stench of boiled cabbage, cigarette smoke, and bleach failing to mask cat urine hit him like a wall. A single fluorescent tube buzzed overhead, flickering like something dying. He climbed the groaning stairs in silence, past a crying infant, a muted game show, an argument in a language he didn't recognize. A world of survival, raw and unpolished. The opposite of everything he'd just walked out of. The opposite of GR. Somewhere on the third floor, a door opened a crack, an old woman's eye appearing in the gap, sizing up his ruined coat, and the shape of the holster underneath it before the door shut again without a word. Nobody in a building like this asked questions about a man who moved the way Taemin moved. They'd learned, the way people always learned in places the law forgot to visit, that questions cost more than silence. Fourth floor. Unit 402. The lock was splintered, the latch broken clean off. He drew his weapon in one fluid motion and pushed the door open. The apartment was colder than the street. No furniture, none at all, just a scuffed hardwood floor, and against the far wall, a folding table holding an outdated laptop, a stack of encrypted hard drives, and a neat row of manila folders. His folders, the syndicate's business. "Seo-yeon," he called. His voice sounded too loud, too intrusive in the hollow space. Nothing, just the rain against the glass. He moved down the short hallway and saw it. Dark, rust-colored smears on the linoleum. Not spatter. Drag marks from someone who couldn't lift her own weight. The copper smell sharpened as he approached the half-open bathroom door. He pushed it wide. Seo-yeon was wedged in the narrow space between the chip tub and the toilet, lit by a single bare bulb. She wasn't dead, but she looked like she'd been trying to be. Her oversized gray shirt was soaked through with sweat and blood, a thick towel pressed hard against her thigh, her skin the color of old parchment. The bruise on her jaw had bloomed into a massive sprawl of purple and yellow. In her shaking hands was a curved needle threaded with black nylon. She couldn't get a grip steady enough to push it through her own skin. Taemin froze. A man who'd watched people die without his pulse changing felt this like a blow straight to the sternum. He dropped his gun on the sink edge. It landed with a heavy clack. Soo-yeon's head snapped up, eyes glassy with fever. She stared at him a long moment, then let out a dry, rattling breath. "You're tracking mud on my floor, boss." He dropped to his knees beside her, the cold seeping through his trousers unnoticed. "What happened? Who did this?" "Don't yell at me. I have a headache." "Soo-yeon, look at me." He tilted her chin up. Her skin was burning. "Who shot you?" A weak, humorless laugh, ending in a cough. "Nobody shot me. Do I look careless?" "It was a knife. A very big, very ugly knife." He peeled the towel back. The wound was deep, jagged. Someone had dragged the blade sideways, trying to hamstring her. Already inflamed, infected. "Why didn't you call the syndicate doctor?" "Why didn't you call me?" She shot back, hissing as he pressed the towel back down. "The doctor answers to your uncle." "And your uncle answers to the O family?" Taemin went very still. "What did you just say?" The fever hadn't dulled the sharp, cynical intelligence that made her indispensable. She looked at him with something between pity and exhaustion. "The merger is a hostile takeover. GR's family isn't joining you. They're absorbing you. The hit was supposed to happen at the rehearsal dinner tonight. Poison, clean, untraceable. They'll blame a rival crew. GR plays the grieving widow, and her father takes the ports." She swallowed hard. "I found the digital trail Tuesday. Your uncle Daeho routed the payoff through the caterers. I went to intercept the courier carrying the physical proof. He was faster than I expected." She gestured weakly to her leg, then her face. "But I got the proof. It's on the drive on the table." The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Taemin thought of GR, complaining about flower colors while planning his funeral. He thought of his uncle, kissing his cheek every New Year. "Why?" Taemin asked, the words stripped of all authority. "Why didn't you bring this to me the second you found it? Why are you living like this?" A tired, cynical smile ghosted across her split lip. "Because you were picking out suits, Taemin. You wanted this merger so badly you stopped watching the shadows. If I'd come to you without ironclad proof, you'd have thought I was sabotaging your wedding." She looked away at the peeling paint. "And I live like this because my mother's care facility costs 11 million a month. It has a garden. She likes the garden." Something tightened hard in Taemin's throat. He paid her enough to afford both her mother's care and a real life. She had chosen squalor instead, so he'd never know she was vulnerable. So he'd never think of her as a liability. "Hold still," he said, voice dropping to a rough rumble. He didn't ask permission. He shoved his bespoke jacket aside, rolled up his sleeves, and found a bottle of rubbing alcohol in the sad little first aid kit on the toilet lid. "This is going to burn. Just do it." He poured it directly over the wound. Her back arched, a strangled sound tearing from her throat as she bit down on her own shoulder to keep from screaming. He threaded the needle with steady, mechanical precision. He'd stitched up his own men in basements before, but this felt different. Every puncture through her pale skin felt like an indictment of everything he hadn't noticed. "You're heavy-handed," she gasped. "You should have let the courier go." "I'm an administrator, not muscle." "I protect my desk," she snapped back, though it lacked heat. "You sit behind yours." He tied off the stitch, wrapped the wound tight enough to stop the bleeding but gentle enough not to add pain. Noticed, for the first time, the other marks on her. A faint scar on her collarbone. The burn on her wrist she'd always hidden under long sleeves. A quiet, unacknowledged map of violence. She'd taken hits meant for his empire and handed him his coffee the next morning with a blank face. From the empty living room, a sharp ring cut the silence. His burner phone. The one only 3 people had the number to. He didn't move, he just looked at her. "Answer it," she whispered. "It's her. It's almost noon. She'll want to talk about the seating chart," he answered, keeping his eyes on Soo-yeon. "Where are you?" GR's voice, tinny and sharp. "Do-yoon said you went across the river. The caterer is threatening to walk if we don't finalize the menu." Taemin looked at the blood drying in the creases of his knuckles. He thought of his uncle. He thought of the poison. "GR," he said, terrifyingly calm. "There is no menu. There is no rehearsal dinner. The wedding is cancelled." A long, stretching silence. Excuse me? You cannot cancel this wedding, Taemin. Do you understand what my father will do? It's a hostile takeover, he corrected softly. And your father is about to learn that the Kang ports are closed to him. Tell him the courier he sent Tuesday was sloppy. Tell him my assistant sends her regards. Taemin, do not! He crushed the phone in his fist, the cheap plastic screen spiderwebbing before he dropped it into the dry bathtub. Dion was smiling. A terrible, bloody, exhausted thing, but genuine. You ruined the suit. I hated the suit. He didn't hesitate. He slid one arm under her knees, one behind her back, ignoring her weak groan of protest, and lifted her off the freezing linoleum. She weighed nothing. It enraged him all over again. How little space she took up, how much weight she'd carried anyway. Where are we going? My house. To my doctor. And then, Soo-yeon, you're going to tell me exactly how we bring the O family down to the studs. She'd already passed out against his shoulder, blood soaking into the ruined silk of his shirt. The ride to the estate was a masterclass in suffocating silence. The SUV tore through slick streets, throwing Soo-yeon's unconscious body against his chest at every turn. He didn't adjust her, just clamped his arm tighter and ground his jaw until it ached. Get Dr. Baek, he snapped, kicking his door open before the car had fully stopped. East Wing 3 minutes ago. He carried her through the marble foyer, muddy bootprints trailing behind him, and up the sweeping staircase, laying her in the center of the guest suite's massive bed. The white duvet began soaking up the dark red seeping through her bandage instantly. Dr. Baek arrived breathless 2 minutes later, smelling faintly of gin. Taemin, what? Is that Ms. Yoon? Fix her. Baek didn't ask more. Gloves on, he cut away the ruined shirt and crude bandage. Core temps 40. Severe dehydration and exhaustion. He found a vein and hooked up an IV. The wound's ugly. Whoever did this twisted the blade on the way out. You slowed the bleed well enough, but the infection's already in her blood. Will she keep the leg if her heart doesn't give out from the fever first? Baek flushed the wound with antiseptic. Taemin, her ribs are bruising her from the inside. It's like she's been running on coffee and fumes for a year. The words landed like a blow. Taemin looked at her sharp collarbones under the harsh light and thought of every catered lunch he'd expensed while she sat outside his office, quietly organizing his empire. He'd assumed his money insulated her. He'd assumed wrong. Pump her full of whatever antibiotics you have, he said, voice flat. If she needs blood, take mine. I'm O negative. Baek glanced over his shoulder, something evaluating in his eyes. Kang Taemin didn't bleed for employees. He bled his enemies. But he only nodded and turned back to his patient. She's stronger than she looks, Baek said quietly, more to himself than to Taemin, as he taped down the IV line. Most people with an infection this advanced would already be in shock. She's just stubborn enough to keep her blood pressure spiteful. He glanced at the clock on the nightstand. Give the antibiotics 4 hours before you expect to see any change. Don't wake her before then, unless her breathing changes. I'm not leaving this room. I didn't imagine you would, Baek said, and for the first time all night, something like a tired smile crossed his face. A knock at the door. Do-yoon, holding the stack of drives and folders retrieved from the apartment. Boss, the phones are melting down. Oh, Jung-sik just landed. Your uncle's asking why the rehearsal dinner got cancelled. He wants a face-to-face. Taemin's guilt hardened instantly into cold, focused rage. Tell him I'll meet him. Tell him to come here. By 3 a.m., Taemin sat behind his mahogany desk, wiping down the parts of a disassembled pistol with mechanical rhythm. The hard drive sat at his elbow, an impenetrable wall guarding the shape of his own downfall. He tried every standard bypass code. Nothing worked. Soo-yeon had locked it behind an algorithm he couldn't touch. A soft, dragging sound pulled his attention. Fabric against hardwood, not the heavy tread of a guard. He opened the study door. Soo-yeon stood leaning in the guest room doorway down the hall, wearing one of his oversized black shirts. IV pole gripped in her right hand like a crutch, her leg locked in a brace. She looked wrecked and violently awake. Get back in bed, Taemin said. She didn't listen. She never really had. She'd just made him think he was in control. She took a stiff step forward, the IV wheels squeaking. She crossed the distance in 5 strides and stopped in front of her, hands hovering, unsure where to touch her without causing pain. I heard cars in gravel. Do-yoon's pulling the harbor guards to the perimeter. Bed. Now, you can't read the drives, she said, ignoring him entirely, leaning her weight into the pole. You don't have the key. You're flying blind. I can handle my uncle without a spreadsheet. No, you can't. A spark of real irritation cut through her exhaustion. Daeho didn't just rout the caterer's money. He gave the O family the layout of the South Armory and the shift rotation for your personal detail. If you go to war tonight without knowing what he sold them, they'll slaughter your men. She swayed on her good leg. Taemin caught her by the waist, pulling her flush against his chest. For a second, neither of them moved. 4 years of sterile professional distance. And now she was pressed against him, fever-hot, her heart hammering like a trapped bird against his ribs. "Let me go," she muttered, not meeting his eyes. "I'm going to the study." "I need my laptop." "You need a hospital." Her nails dug into his forearms. "Taemin, please." The word stopped him cold. She never said please. She organized. She executed. She informed. She didn't beg. He looked at her face and saw it. Not fear of the O family, but fear of being useless. She'd starved herself and buried herself in a slum to prove she could carry her burdens alone. Being carried terrified her more than any blade had. He released her waist, slowly, keeping his hands close. 1 hour. You give me the keys, you show me the drops, and then I sedate you myself. A ragged, bloody smirk. Deal. He wheeled his own desk chair around for her, dragged over a stool for her leg, and stood behind her as she pulled the laptop toward her, fingers flying across the keys despite the tremor in her hands. "You're shaking." Caffeine withdrawal. Her teeth chattered. He poured a finger of whiskey and set it beside the trackpad. "Drink it. Opens the blood vessels." She threw it back, coughed violently as it hit her empty stomach, and a faint flush crept into her cheeks. "Disgusting." "Okay, I'm in." The screen filled with a heavily indexed spreadsheet, a digital map of his own ruin. "Filter the last 30 days, Taemin ordered, leaning closer. "Here, 7 transfers from the shell company that handles the dock tariffs. Small, under the radar. Look at the routing." "Cayman," he said, eyes narrowing. "Jungsik's preferred bank." "It's not just money." She clicked a paperclip icon attached to Tuesday's transaction. A blueprint filled the screen. His Incheon warehouse, red X's marking weak points, camera blind spots, the breaker box location. "That warehouse holds the smuggled shipment from the Busan line," Taemin said, the temperature of the room dropping. "If they hit it wrong, it takes out 3 city blocks and the police blame me for it. They're not hitting it to destroy it." She pulled up an intercepted, decrypted email. "They're hitting it to steal it. Jungsik wants your inventory to arm his own men for the takeover, scheduled for 4 a.m. Your uncle is leading the strike team. He's already there, waiting for the O trucks." The silence in the study was absolute. Taemin stared at his uncle's name on the screen. The man who'd taught him to shoot, who'd sworn loyalty over his father's grave. He didn't yell. He didn't smash anything. He inhaled the smell of rain through the window and exhaled slow. "He's going to Pier 4. He's already there. Do-yoon." The study door opened instantly. "Get the men to the armory. Suppressed weapons only, no explosives. We go to the docks, and we go quiet." Do-yoon nodded grimly and vanished. Taemin opened his bottom drawer and pulled out a compact pistol, checked the magazine, slammed it home, and set it on the desk beside Seo-yeon's empty glass. "I don't know how to shoot. If that door opens and it isn't me, you pull the trigger until it's empty." He crossed to her, brushing his knuckles against her unbandaged cheek, still too hot. "Lock it behind me. Don't open it. Understood?" She looked up at him, the detached assistant gone, the woman underneath stripped raw. "Taemin, don't make me plan your funeral." His smile was dark and genuine, not reaching his eyes. "I already cancelled 1 ceremony this week. I'm not asking you to cater another." He stepped into the hallway. The deadbolt slid home behind him with a definitive thunk. Pier 4 smelled of diesel, rotting kelp, and rusted iron. The rain had thinned to a persistent, freezing drizzle. Taemin stepped out of the SUV without a sound. Do-yoon fell in beside him with a suppressed shotgun at low ready. 6 more men materialized from between the shipping containers, faces obscured by wet collars. Nobody spoke. They'd all memorized Soo-yeon's blueprint. 3 trucks inbound, Do-yoon murmured. Empty, ready to load. Cut the towers, Taemin said, voice flat. When their engines die, we move. No survivors on the O side. He thought, briefly, of the version of tonight that was supposed to have happened. A rehearsal dinner, imported wine, his uncle raising a toast to family. He thought of Soo-yeon locked in his study with a gun she didn't know how to fire, trusting him to come back. The 2 versions of the night sat side by side in his mind like 2 ledgers that couldn't both be true, and only one of them had ever been real. The security lights died. Darkness swallowed the pier, lit only by the sickly orange bleed of the skyline off low clouds. Taemin drew his pistol and slid between 2 towers of containers. Through the gap he saw his uncle Kang Dae-ho standing in the mouth of Warehouse 7 under a single flashlight beam, pulling a silver flask from his coat. Relax, a man who thought he'd just secured his retirement. 3 enforcers hopped out of the lead truck, rifles slung loose, moving with sloppy confidence. Codes for the inner vault? One asked. Already in, Dae-ho said, wiping his mouth. Make it quick. Taemin's busy chasing his missing secretary. He won't notice the armory's empty until tomorrow afternoon. Taemin stepped into the open yard. Gravel crunched under his boots. He didn't run. He didn't shout. Dae-ho saw him first. The flask slipped from his hand and shattered on the concrete. Taemin! The 3 enforcers spun, rifles rising. They never got the chance to fire. From the darkness above the containers, suppressed rounds cut through the rain. Thip, thip, thip. The first man dropped instantly. The second folded over the hood of a truck. The third managed one wild shot into the sky before a shotgun blast took his knees out, and a final quiet round ended it. Ringing silence. Dae-ho was backed against the corrugated wall, hands raised, all his confidence gone. Taemin, wait, it's not what you think. They threatened my daughters. Jung-sik said he'd kill your cousins if I didn't. You don't have daughters, Dae-ho, Taemin said quietly. You have 2 ex-wives who can't stand you, and a baccarat debt at the Walker Hill Casino that hit 400 million won on Monday. Dae-ho's mouth opened. Nothing came out. The lie had died in his throat. You sold my life and my men's lives to cover a bad streak at the table. You used an O courier to hide the trail. But you were sloppy. My assistant found you. A secretary. Dae-ho spat, desperation curdling into a sneer. You're going to burn your own blood for a glorified typist? She isn't a typist, Taemin said, raising the pistol, locking his elbow. She's the woman who just ended your life. 2 shots. Sent a mass. Dae-ho slid down the wall, leaving a dark smear behind him, gasped once, and went still, eyes fixed on the rain. Boss, Do-yoon said quietly, stepping up. Trucks are secure. Nobody else coming. Load the bodies into the O trucks. Drive them to the airstrip. Park them in front of Jung-sik's jet. Keys in the ignition. And him? Taemin looked down at the flask, brandy pooling with rainwater. Put him in the driver's seat. Let Jung-sik see exactly what happens to his investments. The drive back felt endless. When Taemin walked into the lemon-scented foyer, the luxury turned his stomach. The real world was a freezing bathroom floor. He went straight to the study. The knob didn't turn. Deadbolt thrown. He leaned his forehead against the cool wood. Seo-yeon. The stool scraped inside. The bolt snicked back. The door cracked open on her exhausted eyes, the pistol dangling from her right hand, finger flat outside the guard. You didn't shoot me, he said. You knocked. She scanned his ruined shirt, the dark stains on his cuffs. Did you? Dae-ho is dead. The O family leaves tomorrow. Her shoulders sagged, the tension going with them. Her good leg buckled and he caught her mid-collapse, scooping her against his chest. She didn't fight it. She rested her bruised cheek against his damp shoulder. He carried her past the desk, past the laptop still glowing with his uncle's ruined empire, straight into his own master suite. He laid her in the center of the bed, warm from the fireplace. I need to wash, he said, staring at his stained hands. Don't move. Can't feel my leg anyway. He scrubbed pink-tinged water down the drain, stripped off the ruined suit, and came back in dark trousers, bare-chested. She was staring at the ceiling. Beck said you need sleep. My brain won't shut off. She rolled her head to look at him, The ink, the pale scars. What happens tomorrow? I explain the new terms of existence to Jungsik. Do it. The Kango alliance was a 20% margin. Cut them off, and... He let out a harsh laugh, bracing his hands on the mattress beside her. I just unraveled a hostile takeover, executed my own blood, and carried you out of a slum, and you're quoting me gross margins. Someone has to keep the books balanced. I was blind without you, he said, softer now. He brushed his thumb along her jaw. Your mother's facility is funded through my trust permanently. The Wonjongdong building is finished. Duyun's packing your things. Then we're burning it to the ground. You can't just mandate my life. I just did. He leaned closer. You bled for me. You're never going back to a desk outside my door. You're staying in this room. I'm your assistant. No, he said, the desperate need in his chest settling into something cold and possessive. You're my partner, and if anyone ever looks at you wrong again, I will tear the city apart looking for them. She looked at the man who'd orchestrated a slaughter hours ago, now looking at her like she anchored him to the earth. I actually prefer the wild sesame oil bibimbap over whatever they were serving at the rehearsal dinner, she mumbled, eyes sliding shut. His chest hitched with a quiet, genuine laugh. He pulled the sheet over her shoulders and lay down beside her on top of the covers, listening to her breathe, watching shadows move on the ceiling. Sunlight cut through the master suite windows like a blade by 8 a.m. Taemin stood at the window in a fresh shirt, coffee in one hand, a new burner phone in the other. It buzzed. A Busan area code, he answered. Taemin. Oh Jung-sik's voice was tight, none of the smooth arrogance of a man planning a hostile takeover left in it. I returned your property, Taemin said, watching Soo-yeon sleep, her fever finally broken, the bruising stark against the white pillow. I hope the flight back to Busan was comfortable. You murdered Dae-ho. You slaughtered my men. This is an act of war. This is an eviction notice. Taemin's gaze didn't leave the bed. The merger's dead. GR is free to pursue other arrangements. But if your syndicate tries to move product through my ports, if I so much as smell one of your men in my territory again, I won't send the bodies back next time. I'll bring them to your door myself. You arrogant son of a... Don't call this number again. He hung up and dropped the phone in his pocket. Behind him, linen rustled. Dooyeon shifted, wincing as the movement pulled her stitches, blinking against the light. She looked around the unfamiliar room, then found him at the window. Did you shoot the phone? She pushed herself up against the headboard, looked down at the oversized shirt, the brace on her leg, and the memory of everything came rushing back. The bathroom, the needle, the promise he'd made her. She looked up. He wasn't the polished, unreachable boss this morning. He was the man who'd knelt in her blood. So, she said, clearing her throat, reaching for her professional footing. The O network is cut off. We'll need to restructure the offshore accounts by Tuesday, or the shell companies flag the tax authority. Taemin braced his hands on the mattress on either side of her, trapping her gently. Stop. I'm just saying, if we don't pivot. Seo-yeon, look at me. She stopped. Your laptop's locked in the study. You're not touching a spreadsheet for 2 weeks. Bake is coming back at noon to check your stitches and start you on a real diet. You rest. I don't do well with resting. I'll get bored. Then I'll entertain you, he said, voice dropping low enough that a shiver ran through her. But you are healing, not working. She looked at the heavy watch on his wrist, the scars on his knuckles. She'd spent 4 years anticipating this man's every need, cleaning up his messes, thinking herself invisible to him. A ghost in the machine. She raised a trembling hand and pressed it flat against his chest, over his heart, feeling its steady, powerful rhythm. You cancelled a multi-million-dollar wedding for me, she said quietly. Not a question. A fact she was finally letting herself believe. I cancelled a business transaction, he corrected, covering her hand with his, pressing it tighter against his chest. I burned down a slum for you. I executed my own uncle for you. I would have burned this whole city down if I hadn't found you in time. Dooyeon stared at him, the cynical walls she'd spent years building finally cracking apart. There was no fairy tale in this. He was a violent, dangerous man, and she was the woman who kept his ledgers. Both their hands had blood on them, but in the cold light of that world, it was the truest devotion either of them had ever known. Okay, she whispered, fingers curling into his shirt. Okay, Taemin. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. He leaned down and pressed his lips to her forehead, lingering there, a silent, absolute vow. The desk was gone. Yoon Seo-yeon was no longer the assistant in the shadows. She was the one thing Kang Tae-min had built his entire empire around without knowing it, and he was never going to let her fall again. And that is how you execute a hostile takeover of the heart. Kang Tae-min didn't just cancel his wedding. He burned his old life to the ground the moment he realized the quiet woman outside his office door had been holding his entire empire together with her own two hands. From boss and assistant to something neither of them had a contract for. That's the kind of loyalty that doesn't get written into any ledger. If you found yourself rooting for the quiet one who turns out to be the most dangerous person in the room, that's the story worth telling again.